My cat walked into the middle of a family dinner and dropped something on the table that changed everything. Not metaphorically, not in the way people described a conversation going badly or a secret coming out in a dramatic moment. Literally, she walked across the dining room floor with the unhurried confidence she always had, jumped onto the table, which she was absolutely not supposed to do, and dropped something between the bread basket and my mother's good china, and then sat back and looked at the 7 people sitting around that table with those yellow-green eyes of hers, like she was waiting for someone to say thank you. What she dropped ended a lie that had been running in my family for 4 years. What she dropped proved that someone I loved had been deceiving people I loved even longer than that. And what she dropped, this small, warm, impossible thing, was something that nobody in that room, including me, could explain. Not fully. Not in a way that didn't require accepting that my cat, whom my family had ignored and dismissed and treated as furniture for the better part of 6 years, had been paying closer attention than any of us. She had always been paying attention. We just hadn't been paying attention to her. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning is where you understand everything else. Her name was Marble, and she came into my life in the least glamorous way possible. She was found in a box in the parking lot of the grocery store where I worked part-time at 22, along with 2 siblings who were adopted before her. She was the last one. She'd been there for 2 days when I found her still in the box, alone, the other 2 gone, sitting with the patience of something that has been waiting long enough that patience has become its default state. She was gray and white in the swirling pattern that gave her the name. Gray with white mixed through it like someone had stirred the 2 colors together without fully committing to either. Her eyes, when she opened them and looked at me, were yellow-green, the color of late summer leaves right before they start to turn. Unusual enough that people commented on them when they first saw her, a kind of cat-specific double take. She was 8 weeks old and she fit in my palm, and she was the quietest kitten I had ever encountered. Not sick quiet, not frightened quiet, just still, observing, taking things in with those unusual eyes. I took her home. I was 22 and living in a small apartment, and I didn't tell my landlord, and I named her Marble, and she slept on my pillow the first night with her small weight pressed against my cheek, and I thought, well, that's it. That's done. This cat is mine now. She grew into herself over the first year in the way that cats do, all planes and angles and specific opinions about things. She was not a cat who performed affection. She did not purr loudly or seek constant contact or do the demanding, loud, look-at-me thing that some cats do. She was present. She watched. She appeared when she determined you needed her and disappeared when she determined you didn't, with an accuracy that I found unnerving until I simply accepted it as part of what she was. She slept in the same position every night, against my left side, her head near my shoulder, one paw touching my arm, not on my arm, touching it, like she needed the connection but was too proud to admit how much. She was, in the language that people use when they've stopped being embarrassed about it, my person, my companion, the one constant in an adult life that was still very much in the process of figuring itself out. My family thought she was fine, initially. I should tell you about my family, because the story doesn't make sense without them. My mother, Evelyn, is a woman of strong opinions expressed warmly. She has never met a situation she couldn't organize or a problem she couldn't approach with a casserole and a schedule. She is the kind of mother who shows up, and the showing up is genuine and unstinting, and I love her completely. And she has a blind spot the size of a continent when it comes to the people she loves, which is both her greatest strength and the thing that created most of the problems in this story. My father, Robert, is quieter than my mother, but his quietness is not the same as the absence of opinion. He processes things slowly and then has them very firmly. He is a practical man in the way that men of his generation often are. Things have purposes, and the purpose of a cat in his framework is not entirely clear, and he relates to things whose purpose is unclear with a kind of benign dismissal. He was never unkind to Marble. He simply didn't notice her, which was its own kind of unkindness. My older brother Patrick was 27 when this story starts and had been living back at my parents' house for 2 years after his own apartment situation fell apart. Patrick is the complicated one, and I say that with love and with the exhaustion of someone who has loved a complicated person for their entire life. He is charming and funny and capable of extraordinary warmth, and he is also the kind of person who lies with the ease of someone who has discovered that the truth is frequently inconvenient and has made a policy decision about it. Not big lies, mostly small ones, adjustments, the kind of lies that oil the gears of a life that isn't working the way you want it to. Patrick had a girlfriend named Simone who had been in the picture for 3 years. Simone was, by all accounts I had access to, a perfectly lovely person. I had met her 4 times. She was quiet and warm and clearly devoted to Patrick, and my mother loved her unreservedly, which was my mother's way of signaling that she thought this was the one. And then there was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who came to the family dinners about once a month and had the specific skill of noticing things that other people would rather she didn't notice and saying them out loud, which made her either the most valuable person in any family situation or the most dangerous one, depending on your perspective. These are the people who were at the dinner table that night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We need to go through the years that came before the night first, because those years matter. The thing about being ignored is that it's harder to fight than active dislike. If someone dislikes something openly, there's something to respond to. There's a clear position. But being ignored is ambient. It's the absence of acknowledgement, the non-registration, the absence of space in someone's consideration. You can't argue against nothing. Marble was not disliked by my family. She was simply not registered. She was not registered when I brought her to my parents' house for the first holiday after I got her, and she explored the living room with those careful, alert eyes, and my mother said, "Oh, there's the cat," and went back to the kitchen. She was not registered when she did something genuinely remarkable. She once opened a cabinet door using only her paw, with a problem-solving persistence that took her 12 minutes, and which I filmed and showed my family, who watched it with the mild appreciation you might give a YouTube video that someone else clearly finds funnier than you do. She was not registered when she got sick at 3 years old with a respiratory infection that required 10 days of medication and vet visits and genuine worry on my part. And my mother said, "Poor thing," and my father said, "Will she be okay?" And Patrick said nothing because Patrick rarely had energy for concerns that weren't his own. The not registering wasn't cruel. I want to be fair to them about that. It was just indifference. The easy, uncomplicated indifference of people who don't have animals and don't understand what animals are, who see a cat in a room the way they see a houseplant, acknowledged in a general way, not engaged with specifically. What hurt, though, and I'm going to be honest about this because the story requires honesty, was the comments. The small, accumulated comments that happened over years and that each one seemed minor, but together formed something substantial. "You talk to her like she understands you." This from Patrick, at least 3 times, always with that slight edge of amusement that was too practiced to be casual. "Isn't it strange living alone with just a cat?" From my mother, who meant it with love, but landed it like a question about life choices. "When are you going to get a real pet like a dog?" From my father, who meant absolutely nothing by it, but who said it every time the subject of Marble came up until it became something I had to absorb and release. "That cat stares too much." From Aunt Carol, which was rich coming from Aunt Carol, who also stared too much. And then there was the night. This was about 2 years before the night that changed everything. when Marble jumped onto the couch next to Patrick, and Patrick physically moved away from her with the slight, exaggerated recoil of someone who has been touched by something they didn't invite. "Off," he said, pointing at the floor. Not unkindly, just dismissively. Like she was a minor inconvenience he was efficiently resolving. Marble looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at me. And something in her expression, which I know sounds like projection, but bear with me, was so precisely the look of someone who has taken note of something and filed it away that I felt it. I felt it in a specific and uncomfortable way. She got down from the couch. She went to the corner of the room. She sat facing us and watched Patrick for the next 20 minutes with those yellow-green eyes. I didn't know what she was watching for. I didn't know then. I know now. The first change I noticed in Marble was subtle. About a year before the dinner, she started doing something she hadn't done before. She started following Patrick. Not in the devoted, attached way she followed me. Different. More like surveillance than companionship. She would appear in whatever room Patrick was in when he visited, and she would sit at a distance and watch him with a focused, steady quality that was particular to her, the quality she had when she was paying very serious attention to something. Patrick found it irritating. "Your cat is staring at me again," he'd say. "She stares at everyone," I'd say. "She stares at me more." He wasn't wrong, and I knew he wasn't wrong, and I told myself she was just picking up on the fact that he didn't like her and was being contrarian about it, the way cats are famously contrarian. I told myself it was cat behavior and nothing more, but I watched her watching him, and something moved, very quietly in the back of my mind, something I wasn't ready to look at yet. Patrick had also, in the year before the dinner, become someone who came to family events with Simone increasingly rarely. There were always reasons. She was working. She was visiting her own family. They had plans. Each reason was perfectly reasonable in isolation. As a pattern over 12 months, it was something else. My mother noticed, because my mother noticed everything related to Patrick and registered it through the filter of devoted maternal concern. "Is everything okay with Simone?" she asked him once at Sunday dinner, in that careful, lateral way she approached subjects she was worried about. "Everything's great," Patrick said. "Easy, warm, convincing. She's just been busy." My mother relaxed. My father nodded. Aunt Carol, who happened to be there that Sunday, made a small sound that could have meant anything and looked at her fork. Marble was in the corner of the dining room, and she was looking at Patrick. I didn't know this would change everything. In the 6 months before the dinner that changed everything, I was aware of a feeling that I could not precisely name. It lived in the middle of my chest, quiet but persistent. The feeling of something known that hasn't yet been let into the conscious mind. The feeling of a door that is closed but not locked. I was aware of it in relation to Patrick. I was aware that my knowledge of Patrick's life had become strangely thin. That when I tried to picture his days, the picture was vague in ways it hadn't been before. He was working, he said. Things were good with Simone, he said. They were thinking about getting their own place, he said. All of these things were possible. All of them were plausible. None of them had the texture of truth when I held them up to the light. I was aware of Marble watching him every time he came to the house. I was aware of something else, too, something harder to articulate. Marble had, in the past few months, started bringing me things. This is cat behavior. I know that. Cats bring things, prey or approximations of prey, objects that have caught their attention, items that they consider gifts or offerings or demonstrations. Marble had never been a big bringer. She wasn't that kind of cat, or hadn't been. But in those months, she started bringing me things from around the apartment. Small things. A hair tie, a receipt from my bag, a pen that had rolled under the couch. And once, about 3 months before the dinner, she brought me something that I almost dismissed as another found object. It was a small piece of paper, folded. She deposited it on my lap in the particular careful way she deposited things she considered significant, placing it and then stepping back and looking at me. I unfolded it. It was a receipt, the kind that comes from a restaurant, printed paper, numbers, and items. The date was from the previous Saturday. The restaurant was a place in the city about 40 minutes from where any of us lived. The items listed were 2 meals and a bottle of wine. I looked at the receipt. I turned it over. There was nothing on the back. I looked at Marble. She looked at me. I thought, where did she get this? The most logical answer was that it had come in on someone's shoe, that it had stuck to the bottom of a shoe and been tracked in, and she had found it on the floor and brought it to me. This was a sensible explanation. I put it on my counter and did not think about it very hard for 3 days. Then I thought about it very hard for a long time, because I knew that receipt wasn't mine. I hadn't been to that restaurant. And in the week before that Saturday, the only person who had been in my apartment was Patrick, who had stopped by to borrow something and had stayed for an hour, and had said when I asked if he wanted to do something that weekend that he and Simone had plans. I went back to the receipt. I looked at the date. Saturday. The restaurant. 40 minutes from here. I thought about Patrick saying he and Simone had plans. I thought about a bottle of wine and 2 meals at a restaurant 40 minutes away on a Saturday when Patrick had plans. And I thought about Marble dropping the receipt in my lap with those yellow-green eyes watching to see what I did with it. What happened next still haunts me. I didn't do anything with it immediately. I want to be honest about that. I put the receipt in a drawer and I closed the drawer. And I told myself I was constructing a narrative from insufficient evidence. A receipt could come from anywhere. People went to restaurants. 2 meals and wine was not a confession. But the door in my mind that had been closed but not locked, it had swung open a little. I started paying attention in the way that you pay attention when you're looking for something but don't want to admit you're looking for it. Sideways attention. The kind that notices without confronting. I noticed that Patrick had a second phone. I noticed this accidentally. I walked into the kitchen at my parents' house when he'd left his jacket on a chair, and something slid out of the pocket when the jacket shifted, and I looked down and saw a phone that was not the phone I knew he had, a different model, an older one. I did not pick it up. I walked back out of the kitchen and stood in the hallway for a moment, and then rejoined the family in the living room and said nothing. I noticed that when Simone did come to family events, which was less and less frequent, there was something in her face when she looked at Patrick that I hadn't seen before. Something careful, managed, the expression of someone who is holding something close and not letting it out. I noticed that Marble, at the family dinner in November, 6 weeks before the dinner that changed everything, positioned herself directly under Patrick's chair for the entire meal. Not begging. She didn't beg. Just there, present, below him, watching upward with those eyes. My mother tripped over her when she stood to clear dishes. "That cat," she said with fond exasperation, "always underfoot." Marble moved aside. Then she returned to her position under Patrick's chair. I watched her and I thought, she knows something. I don't know how she knows it, but she knows something, and she has been trying to tell me for months, and I have been too afraid to listen. The family dinner that changed everything was in December. My mother hosted, as she always hosted December dinner. The good china came out, the dining room table was extended with the leaf that was only used on big occasions, and the guest list included everyone. My parents, Patrick, Simone, who had committed to this one, my mother had confirmed it 3 times, Aunt Carol, my cousin James, who was visiting from out of state, and me, and Marble, who was mine and therefore present wherever I was. I had been aware for weeks of a weight in my chest that was the shape of what I hadn't yet looked at directly, the receipt in the drawer, the second phone, the careful expression on Simone's face, Patrick's easy explanations that explained nothing, Marble's persistent surveillance that had been running for a year. I brought Marble in her carrier because my mother's house was familiar territory for her, and she was a well-behaved cat in public, and there was something else, something I can only describe as not wanting to leave her behind that night, some instinct I didn't question. I didn't know this was the night. Dinner started well, in the way that family dinners start well when everyone is performing the best version of themselves. My mother's cooking was extraordinary, as always. The wine was good. James was funny and relaxed the energy. Aunt Carol was contained, which was not her natural state, but she was managing it. Simone was quiet. She had been quiet since she arrived, quieter than usual, with that careful, managed expression amplified to something that sat in the room like a piece of furniture everyone was navigating around without commenting on. Patrick was Patrick, warm, funny, the version of himself that worked a room without appearing to try. He told a story about work that made everyone laugh. He refilled glasses. He touched Simone's hand once in the way of a man who is demonstrating something rather than feeling it. Marble was under the table. I knew she was there. I had let her out of her carrier when we arrived, and she had done her survey of the house and then disappeared, which was normal. Under the table was a place she sometimes chose at family meals, the warmth and enclosed quality of it, probably. The conversation moved through the usual territories: James's job, my parents' upcoming trip, a neighbor situation that my father wanted to discuss and my mother wanted to resolve in the retelling, Patrick's work, which was fine, Simone's work, which she described in short sentences. And then Aunt Carol, who had been contained for 90 minutes, which was frankly impressive, said, "Simone, how are things? How are you, really?" The table registered this question the way tables register things they didn't expect. A slight recalibration of attention. My mother looked at Carol with the expression she used when she was trying to determine if Carol was about to cause a problem. My father reached for his wine. Patrick's easy warmth developed a subtle current beneath it, like a river that looks smooth on the surface. Simone opened her mouth, and Marble jumped onto the table. Everything happened in a sequence that felt, even in the moment, slightly outside of normal time, the way things feel when they are significant enough that memory captures them in higher resolution than ordinary life. Marble landed on the table with the liquid silence of a cat who has planned her trajectory precisely and executed it without error. She walked, not ran, walked with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who has arrived at a destination they chose across the surface, between the dishes, past the bread, and stopped in the center of the table. My mother said, "Marble, no." And Marble dropped what she'd been carrying in her mouth. It landed on the tablecloth between the centerpiece and my brother's plate. Everyone looked at it. It was a phone, small, rectangular, an older model with a screen that lit up when it hit the surface. And on the screen that lit up when it landed, because the impact activated it, there was a message notification. The preview was visible. Enough of a preview that the people close enough to read it could read it. Patrick could read it. He was close enough. He read it, and I watched his face go through something I had never seen his face go through. Not embarrassment, not exactly, but something more fundamental, the expression of someone whose architecture has just shifted without warning. Simone could read it too. She was directly across from it. She read it, and then she looked at Patrick, and her expression was not surprise. It was recognition. The expression of someone who has suspected something for a long time and has just seen it confirmed in a way they hadn't anticipated and in a room full of people they hadn't anticipated being in when it happened. My mother could not read it from her end of the table. She looked at it, then at Patrick, then at Simone, and her face did the thing it did when she was assembling information she didn't yet have all of. Aunt Carol could read it. I was watching Aunt Carol when she read it, and I watched her face go very still in a particular way, the way of someone who has suspected something for a long time and has just been confirmed. I could read it. The message on the screen was from a contact saved as a name I didn't recognize. The preview text was short. It said, "Are you going to tell them about us, or do I have to?" The silence at the table had a specific quality that I have not experienced before or since. The kind of silence that isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding arriving in a room all at once, without anyone having to speak it. Patrick reached for the phone. His movement was controlled, the controlled movement of someone who is thinking very fast about their next action, and he picked it up and the screen went dark. But it had been seen, all of it, by everyone close enough, and the rest could be inferred from faces. Simone said, very quietly, into the silence, "I've known for 2 months." Patrick said, "Simone." "I've known for 2 months," she said again, same tone. "I didn't know how to—" She stopped, looked at the table. "I didn't know how to come into this house and tell this family. Your mother—" She looked at my mother. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to do it." My mother was very still. My father had put his wineglass down and was looking at Patrick with an expression I had never seen on my father's face before and recognized immediately as devastation. "How long?" my mother asked. Her voice was completely even in the way that voices go even when they are managing something enormous. Patrick didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the phone in his hand and then at Marble, who was still on the table, still sitting there, those yellow-green eyes looking at him with the absolute calm of something that has done what it intended to do and is now simply present for what comes next. "Patrick," my father said, one word, the specific weight of a father's disappointment in a single syllable. 8 months, Patrick said. He said it to the table. "It's been 8 months." Here is what came out over the next hour, in the fractured, non-linear way that truths come out when they've been held back too long. Patrick had been seeing someone else for 8 months. The other person, whose name I will not use because this story is not about them, had given him the ultimatum in that message. The receipt that Marble had brought me 3 months ago was from a dinner with this person, which meant the receipt had been in Patrick's pocket, which meant it had fallen out of his pocket in my apartment and Marble had found it. Simone had found out 2 months ago through her own discovery. She had stayed because she hadn't known what to do with it, how to leave, where to go, how to tell a family that had welcomed her for 3 years. She had been waiting for Patrick to do the right thing. He hadn't done the right thing. The second phone I had seen fall out of Patrick's jacket, the careful expression on Simone's face for months, the declining appearances at family events, the easy explanations that explained nothing, and Marble, who had been watching Patrick for a year with those yellow-green eyes, who had found the receipt and brought it to me, who had, on this December night, retrieved a phone from wherever Patrick had left it in my mother's house and carried it to the center of a table full of the people it was most relevant to. I don't know how she knew. I don't know what she understood or perceived or tracked. I know what I observed. A cat who had been dismissed and ignored for 6 years, who had been called a starer and underfoot and furniture, who had been moved off couches and unregistered at holidays and treated as an inconvenient accessory. That cat had been the only one in the room paying enough attention to see what was actually happening. She had brought it to light in the only way available to her, and she had done it in front of everyone. The dinner did not end well in the conventional sense. Patrick left early after a conversation with my father in the kitchen that I was not present for, but that my father described to me later as the hardest conversation he'd had in 30 years of parenting. Simone stayed longer than anyone expected. My mother sat with her in the living room for an hour, just the two of them, and I don't know what was said, but when Simone left, she hugged my mother for a long time. Aunt Carol, to her significant credit, did not say a single "I told you so." She helped clear the dishes, and she made tea, and she sat with my mother and father after everyone else was gone and was, for once, exactly what the situation needed her to be. James, who was visiting from out of state and had had a front row seat to an evening he had absolutely not anticipated, was gracious and quiet and helped me carry things to the kitchen and said at one point very simply, "Your cat, though." "Yeah," I said. She knew. "She's been trying to tell me for months," I said. I wasn't listening. He looked at Marble, who had retired to the corner of the kitchen and was sitting with her tail wrapped around her feet, composed and calm. "Smart cat," he said. "The smartest," I said. My mother's reckoning with what happened took time, in the way that my mother's internal processes always took time but ran deep. She called me 2 days after the dinner. We talked for a long time about Patrick, about what it meant to love someone who had done something genuinely wrong, about the difference between excusing and forgiving, about the complicated work of not letting her love for him blind her to accountability. These were not easy conversations for my mother, who processed love and disappointment in the same breath. She also said something about Marble that I didn't expect. "I've been thinking about what she did," my mother said, "about how she paused. "I've been thinking about all the times I walked past her at family dinners and didn't notice her, and she noticed everything." "She always has," I said. "I was wrong about that," my mother said, simply, not with excess drama, just, "I was wrong. She's not just a cat. I mean," she stopped. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "I'd like to make friends with her," my mother said, "if she'll have me at this point." I looked at Marble, who was on the windowsill watching the street below with that focused, ancient attention of hers. "I think she's open to it," I said. "She's more forgiving than most people." Patrick and I had a conversation about 3 weeks later. He asked for it, and I agreed to it, because he is my brother, and that is the complicated, non-negotiable fact that I have to work with. We sat in a coffee shop, and he was more honest with me than I expected, not about the facts, which were by then established, but about himself, about the pattern of easy lies and what he thought they cost and what he was beginning to understand they actually cost. It was not a satisfying conversation in the sense of resolution. It was the kind of conversation that represents a beginning rather than an end, the beginning of someone actually looking at themselves, which is harder and slower than it sounds. He said something about Marble. He said, "I always felt like she was judging me." "She wasn't judging you," I said. "She was watching you. There's a difference." He considered this. "What's the difference?" "Judging is a conclusion," I said. "Watching is paying attention. She was paying attention because something in what she saw required watching. She didn't decide you were bad. She decided something about the situation was off, and she kept looking at it." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "She was right," he said. "She usually is," I said. Simone, I heard through my mother, moved into an apartment of her own in January. She and Patrick were not in contact. She was, by my mother's account, doing the difficult and brave work of starting over, which my mother respected profoundly and expressed by sending food on a semi-regular basis, because that was my mother's love language, and Simone was apparently willing to receive it. I reached out to Simone directly in February. A short message, just that I was thinking about her, that I was sorry for what had happened, that she had handled a genuinely terrible situation with more grace than I was sure I could have managed. She responded warmly. We have stayed in loose but real touch since. She told me once, in a message, that she was glad the cat had done it, that if she had waited for Patrick to do it himself, she wasn't sure she'd have ever gotten out. "Marble did me a favor," she said. "She does that," I said. Marble is 8 years old now. She has the same yellow-green eyes and the same swirling gray and white pattern and the same unhurried way of moving through a room that suggests she has calculated her path and finds it adequate. She is, if possible, more herself than she has ever been. The years have not made her more communicative or more performatively affectionate, because that was never who she was. But there is a settled quality to her now. A quality of a creature that has done what it needed to do and is content with the outcome. My mother makes friends with her a little more every visit. Not dramatically. My mother is not dramatic in her affections, which is where I get it, but consistently. She brings treats now, which she researched, and which she selects with the specificity of someone who has decided to do a thing correctly. Marble accepts these with appropriate dignity. They have reached an understanding that I watch with something approaching joy. My father still calls her the cat, but does it now with a warmth that wasn't there before. He told me once, in the practical way he tells me things, that cat has better instincts than most people I know. He meant it as a compliment. It is the highest compliment my father knows how to give. Aunt Carol has claimed retrospective credit for always knowing Marble was special, which is very Aunt Carol, but also contains enough truth that I can't fully dispute it. She did always say that cat watches too much, and she was right, just not in the way she meant. Patrick is working on himself, in the halting, non-linear way that working on yourself actually goes. He is not fixed, he is not done. But he is, by increments, becoming more honest about who he is and what he does. And I have chosen to believe that this is possible for him because he is my brother, and because I watched Marble bring a receipt to my lap 3 months before everything came out, and I know that change comes in unexpected forms. He came to my apartment for the first time since the dinner, about 6 months after. He sat on my couch, and Marble jumped up beside him. He looked at her and she looked at him, and there was a long moment between them that I did not interrupt. Then he said, to her, "Yeah, fair enough." And Marble put her paw on his leg, not on his leg, touching it, in the way she touched my arm at night, and looked at him with those yellow-green eyes. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "I'm working on it," he told her. "Okay, I'm working on it." She blinked slowly, once, the long, deliberate cat blink, and then she turned around twice and lay down beside him and closed her eyes. I think about what that dinner would have looked like without her. I think about the version of that evening in which Marble stayed under the table, and the receipt stayed in my drawer, and the second phone stayed wherever Patrick had left it, and Simone's carefully managed expression remained managed. I think about how long that version of things might have continued, how many more dinners, how many more easy explanations, how much longer before the weight of it became too much to hold. I think about 6 years of my family registering her the way they registered a piece of furniture. 6 years of, she's just a cat, and she stares too much, and you talk to her like she understands you. 6 years of her sitting in corners and watching with those yellow-green eyes and building, quietly, a picture of the household that none of us were paying enough attention to construct ourselves. She wasn't doing it for recognition. She wasn't performing vigilance or building toward a moment. She was just being what she was, attentive, present, aware, in the way that she had always been from the day I found her in a box in a parking lot, the last one left, waiting with the patience of something that had made its peace with waiting. She was the one who was paying attention. She had always been the one paying attention. We had spent 6 years calling her furniture. She had spent 6 years being the most present person in the room. I think about what we owe the animals in our lives, not just the basics, not just food and shelter and the occasional vet visit, but the actual act of seeing them, of registering them. We had spent 6 years calling her furniture. She had spent 6 years being the most present person in the room. I think about what we owe the animals in our lives, not just the basics, not just food and shelter and the occasional vet visit, but the actual act of seeing them, of registering them, of allowing them to be what they are without reducing them to what they look like or what role we've decided they fill. Marble never needed me to understand her. She was going to be who she was regardless of whether I fully grasped it. But I think about how much I almost missed, How close I came to having her tell me something 3 months before the dinner and not hearing it. How easy it is to look at something every day and fail to actually see it. She taught me how to look, and she did it, as she did everything, without making a fuss about it, without demanding I acknowledge what she was giving me. She just put the receipt in my lap and looked at me with those yellow-green eyes and waited, with infinite patience, for me to be ready. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And tell me, has your cat or dog ever done something that you didn't understand until later? Something that, in hindsight, was so clear, so deliberate, that you couldn't believe you missed it? I want to read every single one of those stories because they matter more than I can say. And if you believe that the animals in our lives deserve to be seen, really seen, not as furniture or accessories or inconveniences, but as the attentive, aware, remarkable creatures they actually are, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. We tell these stories every single week, the ones that make you look differently at the animals sleeping at the foot of your bed. Go home tonight and really look at them. They've been looking at you the whole time. They've always been looking. This story was inspired by and adapted from real-life experiences. Some names, details, timelines, and specific circumstances have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. The yellow-green eyes, the receipt on the lap, the phone on the table, those parts live in the space where truth and story meet, which is where all the best things happen.